let's try and get through the Seder as much as we could, yeah? So we gave that introduction about the importance of the night of the Seder. The Zohar Kadosh says, the whole Pamalia Shemala is sitting and watching together with the Shekhinah and watching us giving praises to Hashem Shvachim. Now you should know, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim is also giving praises to Hashem. Not just talking the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Thanking Hashem and doing Hallel is all part of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's like a package deal. You don't just say stories without thanking Hashem. You don't just a story without giving praise to Hashem. So all of it is included in Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. So make sure you give importance to, from the Kiddush to the Hallel which you say right to the end. You give praise to Hashem. That's all part of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, even simple things, there's a mitzvah to say it out. Even things which you've heard in previous year. ואפילו כולנו חכמים, כולנו נבונים, מצווה עלינו לספר בסיעת מצרים. Even though we all wise, we've heard the story already. What is it? People don't like seeing things twice, don't like hearing things twice. But when it comes to Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's a mitzvah, irrelevant if you've heard it before or not. Say it, be clear. Now, let's go into the Seder from the beginning to hopefully the end. Kadesh, we start with the mitzvah of Kiddush. Even Kiddush is Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Every Friday night, the Gemara in Pasach Pesachim Daf Kuf Yutet says that a person has to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim in the Kiddush. When you're making Kiddush on Friday night, it's not Zecher Ma'aseh V'Reshit only. We're also thanking Hashem for Yetziat Mitzrayim. And therefore we mention in the Kiddush Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. So we start with the Kiddush. We take a cup of wine. Now we all know that Revi'it, we as Sfaradim follow Rab Chaim Naah, and we hold that 86 milliliters is a Revi'it. And we have to drink the majority of Revi'it. So preferably get a cup which you're able to drink the majority of the cup. According to the Ramban, you have to drink rov of the kos, irrelevant of the size. If you take the kos Eliyahu Navi, you know that people take the big cups of wine for Pesach, then you have to make sure you drink the majority of the cup according to the Ramban. Halakha and Ma'aseh, you don't have to do that. If you drink the majority of Revi'it, is sufficient. So make sure you take a cup, a reasonable cup, that you'll be able to drink the majority of that cup. But, again, halakha is your cup must consist by minimum of 86 milliliters, and you must drink the majority of that cup. It says in the Shulchan Aruch, rubo or kulo. So it means to say that in first instance, once you try and drink the full cup, how about it in two goes? Drink the full cup. There's an inyan to do that. Yes, the kosher bracha. Tosfot brings this. You should try and drink the majority. Now, what wine should you use for Pesach night? Really, there's no difference between Pesach night and regular kiddush of a Friday night. Other than the Shulchan Aruch says, mitzvah lechazer achar yain adom. It's ideal to use red wine on the night of Pesach. And the reason for that is, we've got a couple of reasons. One reason is, the Pasuk says, Al terei yain ki it adam. Don't look at wine, other because it's red, meaning that the best wine is, the proper wine is red. Furthermore, we remember the makot. Dam was the first makkah which Hashem brought onto the Egyptians. Thirdly, it's actually second, comes before the third reason, because that was given by a later opinion. The Maharil, I think, says that the reason why we should go after red wine is because it reminds us that Paro took the Jewish babies, he used to bath himself in the blood of Jewish babies. So that reminds us a little bit of what the Jewish people went through at the time of the Shibud Mitzrayim. So for all these reasons, the Shulchan Aruch writes, it's appropriate, it's not obligatory, it's appropriate to go after red wine on the night of Pesach. Now generally, I want to tell you a secret, that on a regular Friday night, the Ramban Nachmani holds you shouldn't use white wine. Even though the Shulchan Aruch rules in Halakha, not like the Ramban, he brings the Ramban as an opinion, Halakha Lema'aseh, you can use even white wine, especially if the white wine is better than the red wine, then it's preferable to use the white wine. But bear in mind that there is an opinion in the Rishonim called Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman, the Ramban, he holds that white wine is not kasher for Kiddush. So if you're able to avoid generally white wine, otherwise, halakha lema'aseh, other than the night of Pesach, you can use white wine. And even on Pesach night, if you're stuck with no red wine, you can use white wine. Sometimes people need the grape juice and there's only white grape juice and they can't drink any wine. They can still drink white grape juice, it's not a problem. Okay?
Is it better to use white wine or grape juice?
Oh, is it better to use white wine or grape juice? Now, I want to touch on the grape juice subject. I do understand that many people prefer not having wine on the night of Pesach because they want to have a clear mind, they want to talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, and if they start drinking wine, it'll affect them. Now, ideally, one should try and drink wine for another reason. Mitzvah lechazer achar yain adom is because yain yesamach levav enosh. It makes a person joyful, happy. On the night of Pesach, when I come to give thanks to Hashem, I need a little bit of happiness. Don't drink too much. A Revi'it is 86 milliliters. Drink the majority of that. How much is that? You've done the mitzvah. Don't have to have Shur Chazonish of 150 milliliters. And therefore, it'll give you a little bit of simcha. But furthermore, I want to discuss a small issue, which on Shabbat we went over this, about the grape juice which we have today. I'm going to raise a little bit of a problem, but really, it won't be a difference between a regular Friday night to Pesach night. The grape juice which we have, they add on special ingredients that it shouldn't become vinegar. It shouldn't get spoiled. That's why grape juice has a long shelf life. And historically, if you squeeze grapes, after a few days, it'll get ruined. If it won't turn into wine, it'll become vinegar. So you have to... So what they add on today is special, remind me? Sulfur. They add on, and that prevents the grape juice from turning into either wine or grape juice. Now, into vinegar. My mistake. So what happens then? So we were discussing about the grape juice. I just want to recap again that the grape juice, because they put this, let's call it what stops it from becoming wine. So some want to say that it loses the status of a geffen. I had a friend who wrote pages and pages on the subject, and he came to that conclusion. And then I saw that Rav Elyashiv held the same. And therefore, ideally, people should be using wine, which hasn't got that problem, right? Because already turned into wine. So let me explain why. Grape juice, the reason why I make a geffen on grape juice, and it's got no alcohol content, why are you making a geffen? What's so special about grape juice? It's like orange juice, to be if anything, like olive oil. But not a geffen. A geffen is because potentially it can turn into wine. But if I take away that potential, then it loses the status of a geffen. So some want to say that on grape juice nowadays, unless you squeeze fresh grape juice, which has no preservatives, then you can make a geffen. But if it's got preservatives, you can't even make a geffen. Surely you can't use it for kiddush. We follow the opinions, and I spoke with this to Ramon Chaliyahu at the time, my Rebbe, and he told me, he brought me a couple of proofs, but he told me, since at one point, before we added on these sulfides, before we added on in these ingredients, which stop it from turning into wine, you could have potentially turned it into wine. It retains its geffen even after that. It's like taking a piece of bread, which was bread, and then making it into toast, brittle. You're not going to make it a mezonot now, because at one point it was hamotzi, it retains its status of the bracha. So that's why we make on our grape juice, which we have today, borei peria geffen, even though they can't possibly turn it into wine once they've put these ingredients inside it. Okay? Now, so if you're able always to use wine, use wine. Tavo alecha birkat tov. There's another advantage to using wine which is not boiled, wine which is not cooked, mevushal, what we call. Now, you have to be very careful. If you've got guests which could render the wine into stam yanam, which you can't benefit from it after, or can't drink it after, not benefit, you can't drink it, then make sure you bring only mevushal wine. However, if you're able to, according to the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, yain mevushal is not kasher for kiddush. You can't use it for kiddush. Shulchan Aruch doesn't follow that ruling, but he brings that opinion if you're able to cover it. So if you're able to take wine which is not mevushal and use it for the arba kosot, for kiddush on Friday night, it's ideal. It's the best. But if you don't, all wines are kasher, even though they're mevushal, they're kasher. Even grape juice, which has got those sulfides, it's also kasher to make. So, first choice is wine red, which is not boiled, is first choice. Second choice is wine, even if it's wine is the second choice. Third choice is wine which is mevushal. Then, if you can't do that, use grape juice. Even the grape juice which have the sulfites in it, you can make on it a geffen and you can fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush. If anybody has got any doubt that by drinking wine it will spoil his seder and he won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah of talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim properly, then it's better that he relies on his opinions and he uses even grape juice for his arba kosot. Like this, he maintains a clear mind from beginning to end. Okay? I know people are the opposite. If they won't drink a little bit, then the excitement won't be there and the Sipur Yetziat won't be as good. So each one should make that calculation. You take Kiddush. Our custom is that one person says the Kiddush on behalf of all the guests, all the family members of the household. Berov Am Hadrat Melech. And since by Kiddush everybody's paying attention, like a motzi, everybody's quiet, then one is able to do a bracha for everyone. And it's not a long bracha, like Birkat Hamazon, that we say each individual should bench because you can't follow for so long. So therefore, only one person makes Kiddush, and we stand up for the Kiddush like a regular Friday night, and we do the Kiddush, and everybody listens, and you must hold the cup of wine at the time you're making Kiddush. Because Shomea Keoneh, we have a mitzvah to drink that cup of wine, and therefore we will lift it. Not like a regular Friday night, we have a little bit of the leftovers of the Kiddush. We're having a proper cup of wine in front of us. So it is as if we are making the bracha on the Kiddush ourselves. And therefore one is holding the Kiddush cup himself once he listens to the bracha, which has been said by the Baal HaBayit. Is that clear?
Rabbi, are we
Yeah.
particular about the type of cost that we have, whether it's glass or metal or see-through or anything? There's no particular about
No.
As long as it's 80
No,
cents.
some say you should have a leg, some say you should go for the base, I couldn't do Kabbalah with 5 fingers.
It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. As long as it's a nice, respectful glass, it's good. On the contrary, if you think crystal is nicer, use a crystal. If glass is nicer, use a glass. Adrabah. Maybe there's an inyan to see the redness. See through. No, possibly. So that's, yeah.
Can I dilute by it's still considered one?
Right. Really, our grape juice and wine do not tolerate diluting kimat. So therefore, apart from the 3 drops of water we put, we shouldn't be adding on any water to the wine. I'm against it. I don't think you should. Not into grape juice and not into wine. Okay?
What about them together?
If you did put, the Kaf HaChaim says so long as majority is wine, you can still make a geffen. But I'm not so sure about that, because if today you give a person wine which you added on even a quarter water, he'll think you're giving something disgusting. Right? So therefore you have to bear in mind that nowadays our wines don't tolerate much water. And therefore, apart from the 3 drops which you put according to Kabbalah, you shouldn't add on more water into it.
Can I add grape juice to wine?
Yes, you can add on grape juice. You can mix grape juice and wine. Yeah, if
How
you
much
feel.
can I put on my
No,
salad?
that's no shiur, because they both are geffen. They don't annihilate each other. They complement each other, possibly. Okay? Min mebinah. Now, that's the mitzvah of Kiddush. So, after the Kadesh, we've got the mitzvah of Urchatz in the Seder. Remember, Pesach night is called Seder night because there's an order. The Gemara says if you drank 4 cups of wine at once, you haven't your Seder mitzvah. You have to drink it in an order. This has to be in a special order, and there's great significance to the order which we're doing it in. That's the Seder night. One very important point I want to mention is the importance of all these actions which you're about to do now. washing the hands, eating the karpas, eating bitter herbs, having charoset. All these actions we do help us pass on the message of the story which we went through. Having bread, lechemoni, it all helps us pass on the message. And no surprise that we today commemorate Pesach as if, and I say it always, if someone not from the Jewish nation comes and sees us commemorating Pesach night, he'll probably feel, if you give him to guess how many years have passed since Yetziat Mitzrayim, he'll say maximum 10 years ago this happened. Maximum 10 years. No? The way we're doing it, it sounds as if only a few years ago we came out of Mitzrayim. And why is that? Because of the way the Chachamim told us to commemorate Pesach night. All the actions we do, the reclining, the eating lachemoni, the eating maror, the eating, all these actions helped us pass on the message of Yetziat as if we are coming out of Mitzrayim very recently we've come out. It's so fresh. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to the details of what we're doing. Now, in order to arouse the child to ask questions, we're going to be dipping more times than we would normally do on a regular evening. And that is going to create questions. What are we doing here? Shebechol halelot. So therefore here we come to the first dipping. Now, we try to include, like Jewish people, we try to include a lot of things in what we're doing. And therefore, we're going to take a piece of vegetable. We take celery. That's being the practice of the Sfaradim, which is called karpas. And the Ben Ish Chai gives remazim on this. Karpas, it's the words parech, samach, 600,000 Jews were subdued, and parech, so it makes the letters of karpas. There's other nice ideas behind it. Once someone said, if you look at the celery, it's got stripes on it. So pasim, lashon nofel al lashon. It's the same language as stripes. Not to say that Yosef's coat was a stripe. It wasn't, probably. It's a material. Chur karpas utchelet. However, it reminds us of the pasim. The name pasim, ketoret pasim. How did we go down to Mitzrayim in first place? Remember when brothers didn't get along with each other, when there was jealousy, and they fought, and they were going to kill him, and they ended up selling him to Mitzrayim. And then the whole galut of Mitzrayim began, and the Jewish people went down to Mitzrayim. So therefore, we start the Seder night with our history, how we went down to Mitzrayim. We take this celery. Now, remember, we're going to be eating maror when the meal begins. And that maror will be eaten when? With milk. If this fresh. That maror will be eaten after we make hamotzi. Now, having a whole vegetable in the middle of the meal, not with your food, many opinions hold that you should make konet borei peri adama because it's not included in the hamotzi. People don't eat whole vegetables. If you have a salad cut up and you have it with your chicken and your rice and you have it along with the bread, so it's covered with the bread. But if you're having a whole cucumber, just biting it, the Mishnah Brura holds you should make konet adama. So since there's a debate whether on whole vegetables you should be making adama or not, in order to get away from any doubt, we will make borei peri adama on the celery which we're eating now and have in mind to cover the adama of the maror. And even though the Rambam writes that we have karpas, we have a kazait of karpas, tonight we're going to reduce the shiur to less than a kazait. And the reason for that is, some say that if a person has a shiur of karpas prior to the hamotzi, you have to make an after bracha before you wash your hands hamotzi. Birkat hamazon will not cover it, because it's not part of the meal. It's a machloket. And therefore, in order not to get into that doubt, we're going to take less than a shiur, 27 grams of celery. We're going to take a small piece of celery, and we're going to make konet adama, and make sure we don't have more than that within 4 minutes. After 4 minutes, you can have another piece. After 4 minutes, another piece. But before we do that, we wash our hands. Why? Because anything which we immerse in a liquid, yain shachat dam, there's 7 kinds of liquids which if you wet fruits, they're susceptible to impurity, to tum'ah. So therefore, Hachamim made a takana that before we immerse food into liquids, we have to wash our hands. Now you will ask, but we're having less than a kazait. So why do we have to wash our hands? So there are 2 answers given to that. Some want to say that dipping into liquids is more stringent than bread, because liquids is what actually makes the conduct of tum'ah, and therefore they say even on less than a kazait. But we won't go with that answer. We'll go with the other answer that the Haidar brings. Is even though originally the Rambam writes to have a kazait of karpas, we reduced it because a doubt of after bracha. We might have to make before the amotzi. But because the order of the night was to do urhatz and karpas, we will still wash our hands before we eat the karpas. So 2 reasons we have why to wash our hands. So a person should do netilat yadayim without bracha, because anything which is not for hamotzi, we do not make bracha on netilat yadayim. So even though we have to wash our hands, but we don't make a bracha of al netilat yadayim for the washing of the hands. Now washing hands should be done similar or the same as what we do to hamotzi. 3 times on the right, 3 times on the left, and no bracha. You sit quietly and you make the bracha of Borei Peri Adama. Now each person should make the bracha on his own, because there seems to be lack of unity and order at the time people are sitting down at the table. But halachically, if we're all sitting together, we're able to make one for everybody as well when it comes to Adama.
Well, even because he's going to have in mind the maror.
But it's okay, Shomea Kioneh. If you listen to someone making bracha, it also covers
But
us.
he's having in mind.
Never mind, you can have a mind. When he says Adama, you have a mind in it. But you can make your own bracha for Adama. Okay? Now, we'll dip it into salt water, preferably, as it reminds us of the tears of Yosef when he was crying when they sold him. And the reminds of the tears of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. So we dip it into salt water. Some into lemon juice, but when you dip it into lemon juice, you have to make sure you mix water into the lemon juice, because otherwise it's not tibulo b'mashke. It's not one of the 7 liquids which you have to wash hands. If it's pure juice, it's not susceptible to tumah. So if you take pure orange juice and you dip your biscuit, pure orange juice and you dip your karpas, pure lemon juice, you wouldn't have to wash your hands. It's only when it's water that you have to wash your hands. So therefore, if you're using lemon juice, make sure you mix water into your lemon juice.
What about the water?
Today, bottled lemon juice has water in it.
Bottle, I'm talking about when you do fresh lemon, squeezed lemon juice. Who uses bottles? It's not fresh.
What about parsley? What about parsley?
Eh?
Parsley instead of the
Now,
celery.
there are some communities who use parsley. It's hadama, there's no problem. There's some people who use carrots. There's some people, any vegetable you can use. But that was our minhag, is because of the ketonet pasim and the word karpas, so it fitted well with the idea of Mechirat Yosef. But as long as you're using something which you make hadama, I think some Moroccans use parsley, some Persians use parsley. The Iraqis use parsley? They used to use the top of the karpas. Celery, the top of the celery, the leaves, maybe look like parsley. But if you use you use radishes. So each community, as long as it's hadama, we are covered. Okay? And we dip it into the salty water, and we have less
Anyway,
kazai.
you're making hamotzi, so hamotzi would have covered the maror adama. So why is
I'm sure I explained that. There is a machaloket because you're having the vegetable of maror on its own without any bread, and you're not having it with your food. So therefore, even if you're having it in the middle of the meal, it requires the bracha. It's not covered with hamotzi. Some opinions hold, most opinions hold like that. If you take a whole pepper in the middle of your meal and decide to eat it, the Mishnah Berurah brings you should make hadama on it.
of your salads?
If you're having it as salad is usually eating with a bread or with food, so therefore it's covered with hamotzi. But if you have a whole vegetable, it's not covered for hamotzi. It doesn't come to fill you up. Vegetables don't fill you. Yeah. So that's why we cover it with the adama, because of this machloket. It's an argument in halakha whether to make adama or not. So therefore, we want to avoid arguments. We'll make the adama and the karpas. According we have to make adama. And we're worried about the after bracha. We want even a kazait in order not to have to make an after bracha. Now, if you do want to keep on eating, and people tend to have a lot of karpas during the meal, or they have sweets during the meal, we're going to soon speak about that. Make sure you don't have a kazait within 4 minutes. Have small pieces. We'll soon talk about the egg.
Is it better to use salt water or lemon juice?
Salt water. Salt water is better. And we're not making such a strong solution, but you can make it in Yom Tov, there isn't a problem. If it's Shabbat, it'll be a problem making the salt water, yeah? Yen Mulin, you don't make these...
Why can't you use anyway pure lemon juice? Because you said the reason. It
'Cause
was anyway in order though.
pure lemon...
It was anyway in order. You can use the same answer.
It's very hard. You're right. Now, we're not taking Shivish here now, but yeah, you got a point in what you're asking, but at least you want something to bulo mashke, because that's the reason why they initially... At least they make it similar to what they used to be, okay? Go for the other answer. Even on lesser kazait, you have to do this. Now, if someone did eat a kazait, did have a lot of celery, was very hungry, so you'd say you have to make borei nefashot. Then Yishchai comes with a big chidush and he says you don't have to make borei nefashot. We made a pact, we made a deal with the maror. Just like we covered the adama of the maror will help us cover the birkat, the after bracha for the karpas as well. So after the fact, if you did have a kazait of karpas, don't make an after bracha of borei nefashot. That's what the Ben Ishai writes in Odis of Chai. Very contradiction between Ben Ishai and Odis of Chai. Let's continue. Kadesh urchatz. Karpas, you should know we have a custom in our home. In between each one of the Kadesh, we sing the whole of the Kadesh urchatz. Only after the rochza lechatchila, we don't want to make an interruption of talking, as the Shulchan Aruch says. It's appropriate not to talk after netilat yadayim. Tov leachmir. All right. So therefore, there we don't say the Kadesh urchatz, but generally, every time we come to make a new section of the Seder night, let's sing the Kadesh urchatz every time in a different tune. Kadesh urchatz, Kadesh urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz. Whatever tunes you want, in order to highlight that there is an order to what we do. Karpas. Then we've got what mitzvah? Yachatz. The mitzvah of Yachatz. Now, we follow the Shulchan Aruch's opinion. I don't think you probably didn't hear a different opinion. And we have 3 matzot on our table when we make Yachatz. So, the reason for that is because in every meal on Yom Tov and on Shabbat, we need to have 2 full chalot or matzot for the hamotzi. Why? Lechem mishneh, in remembrance of the man. If we're going to be breaking one of the matzot, we will end up having one whole one broken one. So that's why we add on a 3rd matzah, in order that when we make hamotzi, we'll hide away the broken one in between, and we'll make hamotzi on a whole matzah at the top, 2 whole matzot. The Rambam's opinion is that 2 is sufficient, because tonight is the night of Pesach. We're like poor people. Lechem oni. So lechem mishneh can be even a broken matzah. So you make hamotzi on the broken matzah. But we don't follow the Rambam on the night of Pesach, tonight. And we take 3 matzot. We're going to break the middle matzah. Take the middle matzah, we're going to break it. Now, a poor man, generally, when he gets food, he doesn't eat everything at once because there's no way he's going to get food again. So here we make another show, another act of poverty. We take the middle matzah, we break it into 2. We don't break it, we actually tear it because we use the soft matzot. And we do yachatz. We try to get what letters, remind me? Vav and Daled.
You do, Rabbi.
Main-
Dalet and Vav, you do.
Main idea is we break it into 2 because the poor man will eat a little bit now and leave the majority for some other, how do you say, for a wet day, what we call. He doesn't know when he's going to get bread again. So therefore the bigger piece is going to be the tzafon. It's going to be kept for the end of the meal. Before Birkat Hamazon, we're going to have Afikoman. The smaller piece, we're going to leave in between the 2 matzot for the hamotzi, which we're going to be doing soon, yeah? So that's a mitzvah of yachatz. We break the matzah into 2, and the smaller piece we keep With the matzot, the bigger piece, we give it to someone to hide. It's become a custom to keep the kids awake, that they give it to a youngster to go and hide it. Make sure that you take a little piece and you keep it next to you, because he might hide it so well that he himself won't find it. So, minhag is to put it, the Rambam to put it under the mapa, and you keep it for the end of the meal, just before we cut Hamazon. That's called yachatz. We take the small piece, and here we start yachatz, magid. We start the Haggadah. Remember, for the night of Pesach, you must have shemura matzah. You should have shemura matzah. So you must, if you don't have shemura matzah, you do with not shemura matzah. Shemura means that they've actually protected the wheat from water already from the harvesting, not just from the grinding. Halachically, even from the grinding would be okay, but we follow the advice of the Shulchan Aruch or taking shmura from grinding time. Preferable to use handmade matzot. So it should be matzot lishma. Let's continue into...
Why just shmura, just for the mitzvah or matzah? Why not the whole Pesach?
Because some opinions hold that you don't fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah on the night of Pesach other than shmura mishat ktsira. So therefore we want to cover that opinion as well, yeah? Now, let's continue to Magid. After the Yachatz, we start the Haggadah. And here, people should make sure that they read the Haggadah. Even though it's customary to give it round to people to read different sections, but make sure you don't miss out on the reading of the Haggadah, any parts of the Haggadah, because you don't know which parts are really crucial. And if you miss them, you kind of have to read the Haggadah. So, make sure you're reading together with the Magid. Now, you should read the Haggadah loud, with happiness, and remember you're fulfilling the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. At the beginning, we take the middle matzah, and every community has its practices and customs. We have a custom that we give it to youngsters to go and knock on the door. And I remember as children, we always knocked on the door with our heads. Bang, 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 we knocked on the door. And I never understood why we knocked on the door with our heads. Why can't we knock with our hands? And we used to put the matzah on a pillowcase, on something, and then we knock and ask us the question, where have you come from? We'd answer from Misraim, and then in Arabic. And when? Misraim. And where are you going to? Yerushalayim? Have you got any, what are you going to do there? Korban Pesach? Have you got any questions? So I said, the man ishtana, and you go to the procession of the man ishtana. Now I thought that the reason why they banged with their head is because when the Jewish people came out of Mitzrayim, they came out with so much spoil, gold, silver, so they had baggages full. So they didn't have hands to be able to knock, so they used to knock with their heads before they came in. No, that reminds us of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We continue on to the Man Ishtana. Man Ishtana La'alazeh, we read the whole of the Haggadah. Man Ishtana La'alazeh, 4 questions. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, we had 5 questions. They used to ask why every night we eat ben tzli, ben mevushal. And alayla hazeh tzli, why tonight we're having roasted meat? Unfortunately, we have no roasted meat. If Mashiach comes, possibly we'll have it, Bezrat Hashem. But the point is that we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, we don't have any roast, so therefore that question is not on the list in nowadays Haggadah. I did see that in Haggadot in the British Museum, in Cambridge, in the university, they had manuscripts in the time of the Rambam that had the 5th question. שבכל הלילות היו אוכלים בירושלים בין צלי ובין מבושל. But we don't have it today. We only have 4 questions. Now, remember the main mitzvah is to get everybody involved, especially the children, because you're passing it on to them. They're going to be passing it to their children. So make sure you involve them as much as you can and try and explain briefly, in a clear way, and don't drag it too long because it gets boring. And make sure you explain it in excitement to be able to memorize this in a good way, that they should be able to pass it on to their children. That's usually the Maggid. Now we start with the words halach ma'aniya. Diachalu avatana be'arad mitzrayim. The minhag is at the time we're saying the halach ma'aniya, we're passing the matzah around, and everybody holds the matzah until it comes back to the one who's reading the Haggadah loud. So that's the practice by most homes. And we're saying halach ma'aniya, this is the bread of the poor. There's 3 girsaot. There's helach mania, halach mania, and kehalach mania. They're all correct. Yeah, we say helach mania. That's our minhag. It's in Aramaic, we say helach mania. This is the bread of the poor, which our ancestors ate when they came out of Mitzrayim. Now pay attention to this very carefully. At the end, towards the end of the Haggadah, we're going to again be lifting up the matzah. Matzah zu she'anu ochlim al shumah. But look at the difference. At the beginning of the Seder, we're saying halachman. Yeah, this is the bread of the poor. So we take the broken matzah, which is the bread of the poor. Yeah, that looks like bread of the poor. At the end of the Seder, we take zecher to not for the matzah which we were fed at the time we were in subjugation, ela when we were freed. When we were freed, we also ate matzah, but for a different reason. We ate matzah because the dough didn't rise quick enough. We didn't let it rise. And therefore we left in a rush. So that's a matzah of free people. So we take the top matzah and we say, that matzah zu she'anu ochlim. So matzah gives two messages. It's the bread of the poor, which they ate in Mitzrayim, and then we go matzah of freedom. Same matzah was eaten when we left Mitzrayim in a rush, and that gives us the zecher letziat Mitzrayim, the way we left of Mitzrayim. So pay attention to the difference between the two matzot. Now, we continue on to really, there's a lot of observations and details to how to understand the whole of Halachman. Yeah, we invited people for the Korban Pesach, called Glitzich Yeteve Yifsach, called it. So we say it in Aramaic, which was a common language spoken at the time the Halachmania was compiled. Yeah. Now let's continue a little bit more. We've got the 4 questions which are asked the Manishtana, and that's whenever you pass on a message in the form of a question and answer, then whenever you pass on a question of formula, the people remember it and memorize it better. If you tell people facts without a question, not sure they'll remember it so well. But if you get them to ask the question and then you give them the answer, it becomes part of their problem. When it's your problem, usually you remember the solution. But if it's just me piling you with facts, it's very hard. So that's why the Chachamim made it. The Whole Haggadah should be in the form of a question and then given answers to it. So that's the source of saying Manishtana. The message is much more powerful, and that's when you come in to pass on a message to a child, want a child to understand better, get the child to ask the question, you will then remember the answer much better. So that's the Manisha. First question is, that Ben Yashvim Ben Mesubim, reclining, not reclining, other vegetables, so they maror, we have matzah, chametz, So those are the main differences which we have on the night of Pesach. Now, there is a halakha brought in Shulchan Aruch, it's from the Gemara, that a person, in order to keep people awake, you should give them to eat klayot ve'egozim. Nuts. Keep them awake. Today, we've got better nuts. It's called sweets, marshmallows, give them chocolates. So they should stay awake. So every few minutes, if you see people are dozing off or feeling tired, then send around. Give around nice goodies. It's a mitzvah. Because we have to keep people fully awake and paying attention. Now the Haggadah of Pesach, I know that there are introductions to it. There's Avadim Ha'inu Lefaro Mitachila of the Avodah Zarah. The main part of the Haggadah, you know where it's taken from? Arami Oved Avi. From Parashat Kitabo. In Parashat Kitabo, when the Jewish people have to have mitzvah of Bikurim, bringing the first fruits to Yerushalayim, then they had to make a declaration. They had to declare, I've come to the land which God has promised us. And here I want to give thanks to Hashem for the fruits. And in order to give thanks, you have to say your history. Well, you're saying thanks over what? You're saying thanks that you were in such a bad place at one point, and now you're in a much better place. So in order to be able to say thank you, you have to explain what you're saying thank you for. So the Chachamim found a certain section of the Torah which kind of summarizes our history in a situation where you have to give thanks to Hashem. When is that? When you bring the Bikurim. When you come to give Bikurim, we come to give thanks to Hashem. So we start with Arami Oved Avi, Vayered Mitzrayma, Vayagor Sham Mipte Me'at, and that describes all of the subjugation of Mitzrayim until we finally get released from Mitzrayim. And on each section of that piece, the Chachamim make a darush on it, and there's a little piece explaining each section of those Pesukim, which we say at the declaration of the Mitzvah of Bikurim. That's Thanksgiving. And tonight it's all about thanking Hashem, about acknowledging the greatness of what Hashem has done to the Jewish people. So that's why we read Arami Oved Avi. Now there's many Agadot which you can use on Pesach night. Though it's probably what's been written the most books on probably is an Agadah of Pesach. Not only that, even if the rabbi didn't write a book on it, they'll usually take from all his commentaries and compile a book, Agadah of Pesach, from the rabbi. So you've got many, many Agadot. But try and use an Agadot which gives you a brief explanation onto each section of the Agadah. They should understand the main things of what you're saying, understand what you're saying. So that's Arami Ovedet. That's the story of Mitzrayim. Matchilim begnut umesayimim b'shvach. We start the story and what a bad place we were. Our ancestors used to be idol worshippers. And they went through, and then there's Abraham, then there's Yitzchak, then there's Yaakov. Then again we went down to Mitzrayim. Again we went into trouble. And eventually Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. That's the whole story of Arami Oved Aviv Vayered Mitzrayim. There are very different explanations to each bit of bits. You can have a look at all the Haggadot with explanation. Now, we have to remember that all the mitzvot of Pesach ideally should be done before midnight. Ideally should be done before midnight. So I'm going to explain. Now, surely the kazait matzah, which we're having for the mitzvah, and it's a biblical mitzvah to eat kazait matzah on Pesach, should be done before midnight. So therefore, even though I can go through a lot of explanation of the Haggadah of Pesach, I want to skip quickly because we're not left with much time. I want to skip to the rest of the thing, but you have to know that you have to aim to try and finish even Hallel prior to midnight. But I'll soon explain what's the halacha if you didn't do that. First kazait of matzah definitely has to be done before midnight. This machlokot between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar. You don't get into any of this machlokot. Person should make sure that he reaches the kazait of mitzvah of matzah ba'erev tochlu matzot on the night of Pesach. Now, I didn't point out that the Seder night should start really after nightfall because the 4 cups of wine belongs to the Haggadah or Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and therefore it should be done after nightfall. That's why we wait for nightfall to start the Seder night. On the second night, if people really have to, they can pray prayers early, but still there's a problem of preparing from Yom Tov to Yom Tov, so you should also start after nightfall the second Seder. Now, you get to the end of the Magid, there's a second cup of wine. We don't make bracha on the second cup of wine because we've covered it with the first cup of wine. I forgot to discuss the egg, didn't I? How can I forget the egg? We have to have on the Ke'ara, on the Seder night, 2 kinds of foods. One roasted, one cooked. The roasted one is Zechel Korban Pesach, and the cooked one is Zechel Korban Chagigah. Even the Chagigah could also be roasted. Yeah, that's the feast Korban, which was bought on Erev Pesach to be eaten with the Korban Pesach, because it had to be eaten on Arasova. So the mitzvah to bring Chagigah before Pesach, on the 14th, and that could be either cooked or roasted. In remembrance of that, we have an egg. Why an egg? The mourners eat eggs. It's funny enough, the night of Pesach is the same night of the week, which Tisha B'Av will fall on that year, if Mashiach doesn't come. But furthermore, mourners have an egg. We are mourning over the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. We don't have a Korban Chagigah. So the custom is to take a beitzah, an egg, and to have that as the cook. Now, when do we eat the egg? Ideally, it should have been eaten in Shulchan Aruch, and the main course, because that's when you eat the Chagigah offering. However, the custom has become to eat at the beginning of the Haggadah, when we're saying the Mani Avadim Hainu, after the Manishtana. And the reason for that was because historically, everybody, the ones who had to fast on Erev Pesach, didn't go to a Siyum Masechet. They used to fast. So therefore they're very, very hungry. So in order to quieten the hunger, it's generally people who don't fast are hungry on Seder night. I don't know if you noticed that. You all of a sudden lack of food to eat on Erev Pesach. And maybe people should eat less on Erev Pesach. So therefore it was customary to eat it at the Avadim Ainu. But make sure you cut the egg into quarters. In order not to have a kazait, you'll have to make borei nefashot. So therefore make sure you cut the egg into quarters and you give out the egg, and then you can have after 4 minutes another quarter, after 4 minutes another quarter. Just make sure you don't have a kazait b'chdei achilat pras. So therefore you won't have to make a borei nefashot, and then it will not spoil the hadama which you've done. So that's in regards of the egg. We get to the end of the Haggadah. There's a bracha which is called Ga'al Israel. Now remember, we didn't emphasize the idea that you have to drink reclining. According to Shulchan Aruch, anything which halachically you have to drink reclining, even nowadays that we don't generally recline, you have to repeat and eat that again or drink that wine again if you didn't recline. So make sure you do it properly. By the woman, the Shulchan Aruch says only Isha Hashuva has to recline, only an important woman. The Ramah says all our women are important. So therefore, if a woman regards herself important, then she has to know if she doesn't recline, she has to drink again or eat again the kazait of the matzah, or whatever we eat reclining has to be eaten again if we don't recline. And reclining doesn't mean you recline on the air. That's not derech cherut. Who reclines like that and balances himself on the air? So comfortable of eating. You have to make sure that you're reclining either on your friend or someone next to you, or you turn the chair around and you lean against something. Because if you do not lean against something, you're probably not fulfilling the mitzvah of reclining. Because it's not derech cherut. People don't balance themselves, they eat halfway like that. It's not comfortable. So they have to make sure you're leaning on something when you're reclining, okay? Just twist the chair around and recline on the chair.
Does that be a specific angle or just any,
Significantly you should recline, significantly. Literally say either 45 degrees, try and recline, yeah? And eat it. I know it's a bit uncomfortable when you come to drink or eat, but make yourself comfortable. It's very important. Make yourself comfortable that you should be eating comfortably. That's a mitzvah of reclining. That's what our opinion holds, even though nowadays people don't generally recline, but it's remembrance of what was considered derech cherut in the time of the Talmud, in the time when we came out of Mitzrayim, that was considered eating derech cherut. Okay? Now, let's go into the motzi matzah. After we've drank the second cup of wine, we go into the motzi matzah. We have a kazait of matzah. Now everybody is probably wondering, do we have to have two kazaitot or one kazait at the motzi? So some people say motzi matzah. So let me explain to you where the argument started, or where the discussion whether you should have two or one should come. There was a discussion amongst the halachic authorities whether the mitzvah of having the kazait of the matzah is come from the broken matzah or from the top matzah, the whole one. Because it says betziyah, when you make hamotzi, you should do from something whole. So there's a machaloket. In order to cover this argument, we take a kazait from the top one and a kazait from the broken one, and we eat it together. That's where the two kazaitot come from. So therefore, even though halachically, people who don't have three matzot in front of them, and they're not going to have from the matzah of the person who's making the hamotzi because there isn't sufficient to give everybody around, they don't have to have two. But the custom has become that people should have two kazaitot at the time they do hamotzi. Meikar adin, if a person is unable to, then one kazait is sufficient. But the one who's making hamotzi and he's having the matzot which had in front of him, and since he's got it, there's the argument whether he should have the top or the middle, he should have a kazait from each one. Our Peter enabled us to do that. The ideal thing also, if people are worried it might not be from the person who's making hamotzi, is to have in front of you through the Seder night, you own three matzot. That'll be brilliant. Then you're able to have from the top and from a broken one at the time. So it's good if you can have that. If it's not going to create machloket in the house. Yeah, if the person who invites you, or person you gets insulted if you have your own three matzot, then okay, rely on his. But ideally that should be done, yeah? So that's where the two kazaitot comes on. Now it has to be eaten reclined, and you should eat it quickly. Don't waste time. If you're not going to eat one kazait within the 4 minutes, according to some opinions, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of eating matzah. Because it has to be eaten, which is kazait b'chdei achilat pras. So make sure you eat. Don't talk. Stop schmoozing. Leave the talking for when you're having the chicken and the rice. But don't know what you're having the kazait of hamotzi. Okay? Then, let's go further to Motzi Matzah, Maror. We got the mitzvah Maror. Maror nowadays is a rabbinical mitzvah in remembrance of the Maror they used to have at the time when there was Korban Pesach. That's Al Matzot Umrorim Yochelu. Well, we have a matzah, it's a mitzvah. And even though it's a rabbinical mitzvah, just like we make a bracha on achilat matzah, shekideshanu, amotzi and achilat matzah, on the maror we also say shekideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. And we take the maror and we dip it into the charoset. Charoset should consist preferably from fruits which are mentioned in Shir HaShirim, which the Jewish people are compared to. The Tosfot says, El ginat egoz yaradti, we say katamar, we mention tapochim. It's mentioned in all the fruits which are mentioned in Shir HaShirim, we make charoset. Every community will tell you that their charoset is the best charoset. Yeah, it's true. Your community's charoset is the best. But it's not the main part of the mitzvah, it's not the charoset. Charoset comes in the time of the Talmud. There was something which had to be, was very, a worm which had to be killed in the charoset. But I'm not going into that now because you won't understand what I'm saying. But I'm going to give you the explanation which is more rational, which more relevant to today, is the cement which was used. The charoset reminds you of tit, zecher atit. And therefore, we immerse the maror, which was the bitter, and that we don't eat reclining. We immerse it and shake it off a little bit. Don't have it too sweet because you don't want to lose the taste of the actual lettuce which you're going to be eating. We take lettuce for maror, as some will tell you, oh, but it's sweet, it's not bitter. Let me tell you, the source of the maror is quite, and if you leave the maror out for a few days, it'll become bitter. So that's why we have the maror.
At the top it's sweet, but
As you go lower, it gets less sweet. Correct? So it's got that. So anyway, it's not going to change that. Our minhag is to have the maror as romaine lettuce. So make sure it's properly checked, and you buy the checked ones, or you check it before Yom Tov, because Chalila v'chas, as the Ben Ish Chai says, the person who eats a sheret off, he can be transgressing 5 negative commandments. So you do 1 mitzvah and you get him 5 negatives. So make sure it's clean. And today you can get pre-checked ones. It's not a problem to get pre-checked ones. Okay, that's a mitzvah of maror. Now, no problem. Maror, you have to have a minimum of a kazait of maror. Otherwise, you don't fulfill the mitzvah of maror. You don't eat it reclining because it's trying to remind you of slavery. Okay? So like the matzah gives you cherut. Matzah, when it came out of Mitzrayim, we ate matzah. But maror, we ate when we were in the subjugation of Mitzrayim. So that's why it's eaten, not reclined. Someone asked me, what happens if you recline? Do you have to eat maror again? No, you don't have to eat maror again. Okay. The next thing is korech. Hillel held you have to eat the matzah and maror together. So he would take matzah and maror. Korchan, he used to make a wrap with a soft matzah. And he used to put maror inside, put charoset inside, and that we eat reclining. And people tend to make a mistake in order to be able to eat a second. Eat again. But you have to eat it reclining, and he says, Zecher, No, Zecher LaMikdash. Yeah, that Hillel said, שהיה קורחן בבת אחת, והיה אומר, נו, מצה ומרור, פלא ברכה, זכר למקדש, כהלל הזקן. ימינו יחודש, כהלל הזקן, שהיה קורחן ואוכלן, and he used to eat it together. לקיים מה שנאמר, על מצות ומרורים יאכלו. So we eat the זכר למקדש. The most exciting part of the Seder is when you get to the sandwich of the korech. And there you put charoset inside, and you have that wonderful. We have chalek in our charoset. So that then comes the Shulchan Orech.
Yeah, but Rabbi, you said Hillel held you have to have it together.
Yeah.
So then did he have Motzi Matzah and Maror by itself? Or he just
Used to have matzah and maror together.
So why don't we just do Matzah and Maror together then?
We don't hold this matter. We have it separately. We want to have it separately. Two separate mitzvot we hold.
Oh, so Rav Hillel just
Yeah.
did it as a sandwich, that's it.
Now, let's go further. Shulchan Orech, it's no less of a mitzvah. By the way, Oneg Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah to enjoy Yom Tov. So when you're eating your nice chicken, rice, your potatoes, whatever you're eating on the main course, you're actually fulfilling the mitzvah of Oneg Yom Tov, the mitzvah from the Torah. V'samachta b'chagecha. There's a mitzvah to rejoice and to have Oneg on Yom Tov, and that's Shulchan Orech. Don't spend too much time on it, because you want to try and get the afikoman before midnight. Shulchan Orech Tzafun. The mitzvah of afikoman. We take out what we've hidden, afikoman. We call it afikoman. Afikoman was dessert, actually. It says to remove the dessert from the table. We will now bring the matzah, which we're going to eat now, as zecher and remembrance to the Korban Pesach. So, because we don't have Korban Pesach, we'll have matzah instead of Korban Pesach. So we take a matzah, we say zecher Korban Pesach hanechal al asova. That was eaten after we were satisfied. We would eat a kazait of matzah. Some say you should have two kazaitot because together with the Korban Pesach they would have matzah. So therefore they have one for the matzah which was eaten with the Korban Pesach and one for the Korban Pesach itself. But meikar adin you only have to have one kazait at the end of the meal. If you're able to, have two. One for the kazait, which was eaten with the meat, and one for the meat itself. In remembrance of that, and you eat that reclining again. After that, we've got the mitzvah of Birkat HaMazon. You say it with simcha, and there we come and fill the third cup of wine, and we're going to make Birkat HaMazon on that cup of wine. Generally, it's ideal, according to the Rizal, whenever you make Birkat HaMazon, you make a cup of wine, especially on the night of Pesach. So you're giving thanks to Hashem for the food He's given you. You do it in a cup of wine. You fill that cup of wine. Ideally, you should wash your cups in between each one. As according to Pshat and according to Sod, you must have a shtifa and adacha. Wash inside and out. That gives kavod to the cup which you're about to do the bracha on. Then we make zimun and Birkat HaMazon is recited. At the end of the Birkat HaMazon, we will say Baruch Atah Hashem Borei Peri HaGefen, and again recline for the cup of wine. Have in mind when you're saying the Gefen to cover the fourth cup of wine too, because you're not going to be making bracha on the fourth cup of wine. Immediately after that, you start the Hallel. Hallel should try and say it before midnight. The Rabbeinu Nisim, the Ran holds and the Ramah brings that ideally the Hallel should be done before midnight. However, not many people succeed to get that. You want to do it slower paced. Even if you pass midnight, you say Hallel and with bracha. With bracha, after bracha, I mean to say, Yalelucha. You say Melech Meulal Batishmachot. You say it even though it's after midnight. I know the Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul maintains it's Safek Brachot Le'akel, but we hold, like the Kavachaim, like Rav Ovadia Yosef, that even if it's after midnight, the minhag is to say. And there's a couple of reasons to that, even though there's an argument in the Rishonim. But even those who say you should do it before midnight, not necessarily are they saying that you can't do it after midnight. They're saying ideally you should do it. There's no proof from the Ran and the Ramah who said you should do it before midnight, that you can't do it after. It says you try and do it before midnight. And therefore, even if you pass midnight, you make the after bracha of the Hallel, which is Melech Meulal Batishmachot, Ela Odaot. You do it even after midnight. There's no problem to do that. Okay? That's Hallel, and then we've got Nirtzah. If we follow the Seder at the right, that order, then you should know Hashem will accept with Ratzon our deeds which we've done on the night of Pesach.
You said to have Rov Revi'it in your 4 cups, Meikar Adin. But how would you be able to make the Ala Gefen? The Ala Gefen is like
No,
in the
you
center.
have to make
The
sure
fourth one.
that on the 4th cup of wine, or even on the 3rd cup of wine, you have a full Revi'it. Because otherwise you will have an issue of making an after bracha. You don't want to get into, some say it's melolugmo for men shalosh, some say it's, so make sure you drink a full Revi'it for either the 3rd or the 4th cup, you have a full Revi'it, not just the majority. Because you want to make an after bracha, otherwise it's a safek whether you have to make a bracha achorna. So make sure in order to make bracha achorna, you have a full Revi'it. One important point I want to mention just before the end of the shiur, and really we could go into much more details, maybe future years we go into much more details of the whole Seder night and the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. But we have a practice which no other kehillah has. No other, the Sfaradim have a minhag that the Ashkenazim don't have, which is making bracha on Hallel in a Bet HaKnesset on Pesach night. Never is Hallel recited at night. Always Hallel is daytime. Once daytime is passed, you don't say Hallel. One night of the year, we say Hallel. It's not brought in the Talmud, it's brought in the Yerushalmi Talmud, it's brought in Masechet Sofrim. The Tosefta brings about saying Hallel on Pesach night, but it's not in the Gemara Bavli, which we have. The Ashkenazim don't make that bracha. We make bracha on the 2 nights of Pesach on Hallel. Even women, according to everybody, should say that Hallel if they're able to. Even though Hallel generally, some opinions say you shouldn't say Hallel. We don't hold like that. We hold the woman can say Hallel even in any Yom Tov. However, on Pesach night, men, women can say Hallel with bracha. And ideally, when you're saying Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ligmor et Hallel, have in mind to cover the Hallel which you'll be reciting in the Haggadah, because we're not going to make a bracha of ligmor et Hallel on the Hallel of the Seder night. So even though you're walking home and you're making great hefsek, but according to some opinions, that covers also the Hallel which we do that. And we say Hallel b'simcha in Bet HaKnesset. And it's a very strong minhag to say it together with the congregation. Hallel is a very powerful Hallel on the night of Pesach. And that's our minhag which we do it. And have in mind the Hallel of the Haggadah. And we say a full Hallel with the after bracha after that on the night of Pesach. Generally, Hallel on Pesach, after the first 2 days, are said without bracha. Even on the 7th day of Pesach, we don't say Hallel with the bracha. So therefore, it's very special, the fact that you not only that the first 2 nights, we say it on the night, and it's like the beginning of the Seder night is the Hallel which we do. Preferably, it should be done after nightfall. Even though halachically you can do it from Plag Mincha, you should wait for nightfall. Okay, Chasal Tzidul Pesach, Kivchator. Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to do this Pesach in Yerushalayim. Bezrat Hashem, with the Korban Pesach. And with all our families in the Holy Yerushalayim. If not, there'll be a great, great discussion in Halacha, whether if Mashiach comes after Pesach, before Pesach Sheni, whether the Jewish people will be bringing Korban Pesach and Pesach Sheni or not. But we'll leave that for another discussion, another shiur. Yizkor Shanim Rabot, Neimot, V'Tovot.